Hello and welcome back. Recently I asked you guys if you wanted to hear more about how my husband and I budget, and a lot of you said yes. None of you said no, so I will be making that video soon, but before I do, I thought it would be good to step back a little and talk more generally about personal finance. I think that personal finance and minimalism go hand in hand for a lot of reasons, a few of which are that one, as I've decluttered a lot of my possessions, I've taken note of all of the things that I've purchased and never used and therefore wasted a lot of money on. But more important than that, I think, is that minimalism teaches us to be mindful. And until too recently, I definitely was not mindful when it came to personal finances. On June 26th of this year, 2018, a friend and I were having a conversation about money. And the gist of the conversation was that neither of us knew anything about money, but we wanted to change that. Since that time, in less than 4 months, my husband and I have paid off our cars, we're debt-free except for our house, we've built a 6-month emergency fund, and we're able to save a lot more money than we used to. That's a huge deal for me. So today I thought I would share the personal finance best practices that I've picked up along the way and that have helped us to dig our way out of debt. The first thing I did was to start educating myself. I mentioned this started with a conversation where my friend and I realized we knew nothing about money, and so we decided to read a book together. Now, I really had no idea where to start, but I remembered a video here on YouTube by Matt D'Avella, I'll link it below, where he said that the first book on personal finance that he read was called The Total Money Makeover by Dave Ramsey. It looks like this, and it has a dust jacket on the hardcovers that you can remove if you don't want everyone to know you're reading a book by this guy. Now, this is a bestseller. I am not without criticism of this book, but I do think that it gave me a solid foundational understanding of personal finance. Now, you don't have to start here. You can watch other videos or listen to podcasts or go to any bookstore and go browse the personal finance section until you find a title that resonates with you. I don't think it's as important where you start so much as that you start. And the reason I think it's really important is that money can seem really esoteric. It's not, but it can definitely feel that way. And for me, not understanding money or the risks involved led me for a long time to inaction. And inaction can be very expensive. So if you're a total beginner like me, start here or start wherever you feel like it, but give yourself that basic foundational knowledge of personal finance. It can be incredibly motivating, of course, educational, and really help to lift that veil of not knowing that can prevent us from reaching our financial goals. Speaking of financial goals, the next thing I did was to set some financial goals. And I particularly think that near-term financial goals are important, but we'll get to those in a minute. So saving is a means to an end, just like decluttering is a means to an end. And if you don't know what you want your end to look like, if you can't sort of visualize it and set your heart on it, then it can be very difficult to stay motivated and do the work and make the sacrifices to meet those goals. I've struggled with saving for a very long time for a lot of reasons, but one of the big ones is that I didn't have any financial goals. So actually identifying what my financial goals were has gone a long way towards keeping me motivated and focused to achieve them. Now, I mentioned the importance of near-term financial goals. And the reason I think those are so important is that oftentimes our long-term financial goals can be very noble, but also sort of unapproachable and lofty. So say if our long-term financial goals are to save for retirement, or save for a down payment, or pay off our house, or sort of generally achieve the security that being financially free can bring, those are all great goals, but if we're nowhere near reaching those goals, then it can be difficult to understand the first step towards achieving them. So what I like to do instead is to have a general idea of where I want to end up, and then take that idea and put it on the back burner. And instead ask myself, what can I do in the next 6 months to 3 years to work toward that goal? It could even be a much shorter timeline. Maybe it's what can I do in the next week? Say if your goal is to start saving for retirement, but you don't know how to approach that question, perhaps your goal for the next week could be to start researching 401k plans or IRAs or whatever sort of retirement savings vehicles are available to you. I could talk for a long time about financial goals. I have a lot to say about them, so maybe I'll make another video down the road specifically about financial goals. But I think it's important to understand where we want to end up and then have a series of near-term goals to help us work towards them. The next thing that I did was to calculate my net worth. Now, calculating your net worth is something that people in financial circles recommend as a good habitual practice to sort of make sure you're on track. Now, when I heard about this, I completely balked and thought, why would I do that? It's going to be negative, so why bother? And it can be really scary. And in this age of rampant debt, it likely will be negative. But ignoring that doesn't make it any better. So I got out a spreadsheet and I listed out our debts and our assets, and I chose to only list our liquid or cash assets because we didn't really have anything that we wanted to sell. But especially if you're in a lot of debt and you would consider selling some things to negate some of that debt, then go ahead and list out your non-liquid assets. But you list your debts and your assets, and then you subtract your debts from your assets and you get your net worth. Was it negative? You betcha. Did it feel good? No. But I still think it was a really good exercise because it gave us a much clearer understanding of where we were actually at. And it can also actually be motivating because over time you get to see that number improve. It almost becomes a game and can help to keep you on target. The next thing we did is something I thought I would never do. We made a budget. Now, technically the whole point of a budget is to make sure we're not spending more money than we make, which is a good and valuable thing that budgets help us to do. But the reason I am now a converted fan of budgets is that they allow me to take on a more active role in deciding where we send our money. Before we started budgeting, money came in and it just evaporated. I can't tell you where it went. Now we decide in advance where we want our money to go, and because of that, we're able to save a relative lot of it. It's not magic, it's decision making, and it's being intentional. Before we started budgeting, I spent money on a lot of mindless things. If you followed my channel for really any length of time, you'll probably know that I don't shop a lot in the sort of traditional sense of the word, but I still made a lot of mindless purchases. Now we're a lot more intentional and deliberate over where we send our sort of discretionary spending. And you might think that sort of not having a lot of discretionary spending would lower my quality of life, but it actually hasn't. It's actually improved it because now we're spending and investing money where it matters. We're saving for experiences and our future. Another financial best practice that we've adopted is to have an emergency fund. Now, emergency funds are popularly discussed in financial circles because they're incredibly important, and I think that they're really a sort of necessary counterbalance towards being able to have and maintain a budget, because expenses can be variable and emergencies happen. I recently had to replace the battery and all 4 tires on my car, and if we didn't have an emergency fund in place, then those expenses would have just gone on a credit card and become another source of debt. So if you want to be able to stick to and maintain a budget, I think it's really important to have an emergency fund to pay for those unforeseen events. The next thing we started doing, and something we continue to do, is to aggressively pay off our debts. And the particular method that we're using is something called the debt snowball. Now, I had never heard of the debt snowball before reading the Total Money Makeover, so maybe this is news to you too. But the idea behind the debt snowball is that you list out your debts from smallest to largest, and then you pour everything you got into paying off that smallest debt first. Of course, you make minimum payments on everything, but then you really throw yourself into paying off that smallest debt. Once that debt is paid off, you can then take all of the money that you were previously applying to the smallest debt and apply it to the next smallest debt. And when that is paid off, you can take all of that money and apply it to the third debt. Now, this can have an incredibly compounding effect on your ability to pay down debts. Of course, it kind of breaks down whenever you get into interest rate, however. So if your third largest debt is, say, on a credit card and has a really high interest rate, then you may want to do the math to determine whether or not this is the method for you. But generally, it can have a compounding effect on your ability to pay down debt. And I am a fan of it because it allows me to focus in on one problem area at a time instead of being stressed out about the whole thing. And then when that debt is taken care of, I can move on to the next one. The last financial practice I want to leave you with is something I think my husband and I probably thought we were good at, but we weren't actually that good at it. But we've improved a lot in the last 4 months, and that is not succumbing to lifestyle inflation. Lifestyle inflation is the idea that as we make more money, we're going to spend more of that money on our lifestyle in proportion to the amount of money that we're bringing in. My husband and I don't do that, or we don't do it as much as we used to. Whenever we bring in more money, we don't take that as a cue to upgrade our cars or eat out more or buy more expensive things. Now, this doesn't mean that we never treat ourselves a little. I think it's completely normal and natural to do that, but when we have those instances of treating ourselves, it does not result in persistent lifestyle change. If we're able to bring in more money, that's an increase in our savings power, not our lifestyle. All right, those are all of the financial best practices that I have to share with you today. Of course, there are still tons of other things that my husband and I now do, things like saving for retirement and not using credit cards, but I think the things mentioned here have been the most impactful for getting us to where we're at today. I realize this is kind of a departure from the topics I usually discuss here, but I think that financial health and minimalism are definitely related, and financial health is good for anyone to achieve, so I hope that some of the things mentioned here can be useful to some of you. That's going to be it for me today. As always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time.